Smoothing out 3D prints can be a very time consuming process, but there are some things you can do to make the process much easier. Hey everyone, in today's video I want to show you the steps I like to use to get a smooth surface on my 3D prints, and also show you how I put these steps together to cut down sanding time and cut costs and materials. Alright, let's get started. Most likely your 3D print is not the same all over, which means you shouldn't just use one method on the whole print. I printed some test parts to show you different ways I like to cut down sanding time and the differences between them. Some areas require more work, especially when you have angles that are more horizontal like the top of this test print. Other areas are much easier to smooth like the sides here. One of my go-to materials is Bondo spot putty. I like to use small pieces of EVA foam to apply this. You can find an 8.5 by 11 sheet for about $1 at Target, Walmart, or any craft store. The Bondo sticks to the 3D print very well, and it's easy to apply a thick layer. Be sure to wear gloves and be in a well-ventilated area when applying this. I also wear a respirator when I apply Bondo. The Bondo sands down very easy. After one pass of sanding with a 400 grit sandpaper, I will apply one coat of paint to show you the result. Here it is after one coat of spray paint. For being just one layer Bondo and one sanding pass, I have to say this looks pretty good. It even got rid of the layer lines at the top. And here it is compared to a test print with no sanding and one coat of paint. You can see what a big difference it is when you look at them side by side. The Bondo is perfect for the top, but it is overkill for the sides. I also like to use filler primer. This will cover very large areas much quicker than applying Bondo. Sanding down the primer is easy. It also helps when the primer is a different color than the print. I stop sanding when I start to see stripes from the layer lines. Now I'll show you the primer compared to the paint only. This one is the primer test. You can see a difference, but primer is not enough for the top. And if you look at the sides, it is better, but you can still see some layer lines and the polygon faces. A heavier coat and a second coat should do it though. I also like to mix the Bondo with acetone. I mix it with a 2-to-1 ratio of Bondo to acetone. This thins the putty so it's easy to apply with a paintbrush, plus you'll be able to cover a much larger area. With the acetone it dries much faster, which means you'll not have to wait as long to sand it, but it also means you'll need to be quicker at applying it. And again, I sand this one as well, and then I'll add one coat of paint. Here it is after sanding and painting. The sides look really good. The top would need multiple passes though. It worked really well for the in-between areas here. I've seen other people use wood putty, so I wanted to try that to compare to the Bondo. For me, it's not as easy to apply, but it doesn't have that strong toxic smell like Bondo. It sands down just as easy, and the final result is very similar. Here's the Bondo and the putty next to each other. The wood putty is at the top here. Very similar, but I think the Bondo does look slightly better. I also try the wood putty mixed with acetone using the same 2-to-1 ratio. This seems to be just as easy to apply as the Bondo with acetone. And again, I got similar results. The wood putty with acetone is at the top. It looks very similar with either option. I've also seen people use spackle, so I'll try that as well. Yeah, I don't like this at all. It doesn't stick to the print well and it comes right off. It may just be the brand that I'm using, but I would leave the spackle for your walls. Using the stormtrooper helmet as an example, I'll show you how I put all this together and how it can save you both time and material when you finish your next 3D print. Since this helmet is too big to print on my bamboo, I printed it on my older, slower 3D printer. And to cut down printing time, I did everything you're not supposed to do to get a high quality print. I switched to a 0.6mm nozzle, changed the layer height to 0.28mm, and turned off adaptive layers. Now the print should be complete. Or not. Even with the changes, it still took 4 days. Even with a low quality print, these steps will still give you a smooth surface. And for seams in really rough areas like this, it's best to start with an electric sander or an oscillating multi-tool like this one. You can also sand by hand if you don't have the tools. I would recommend an 80 grit sandpaper. It'll still be rough at this point, you're just trying to knock down the areas that are higher than the rest of the print. And while I'm at it, I'll sand down the layer lines at the top too. After I finish sanding, I spray over the helmet with filler primer. I do a thicker coat than I did on the test print earlier. I start with the filler primer because it's quicker and easier, and it'll help me see what areas will need a thicker layer than what the primer can do. Now I do a sanding pass with 150 grit sandpaper. I'm just sanding down the primer. I keep sanding until the layer lines start to become visible. I also like to use sanding sponges to get the harder to reach areas or where there are more details in the print. For this next step, I'm using Bondo, but you can swap it out for wood putty if you prefer to use that. Since the Bondo is thicker and covers less area, I only use it in areas where it's necessary. On this print, it's just the top of the helmet, the overhangs, and the bottom. Basically, any areas that were printed at more horizontal angles, or if there were print issues. Avoid any areas with high detail because you don't want to cover that detail up. Now, for covering a larger area, I mix the Bondo with acetone in the same 2-to-1 ratio. Again, you can use the wood putty instead if you like. I just use a cheap brush to apply it. I brush it on, but I don't need to cover the whole helmet. I don't apply it where there's already Bondo. It's not needed in areas like the sides where it can be smoothed with just one more layer of primer. And I also avoid the areas with higher detail. I sand again with the 150 grit sandpaper. I only need to sand the areas that have Bondo because I already went over the primer. I always sand in a circular motion to avoid making any deep scratches. Now I apply a second coat of primer, and this time I use a 400 grit sandpaper. Now the print will be getting really smooth. At this point, I'm really happy with it. I just spot check for any areas that I missed. There are a few small areas I want to go over again. I just add some Bondo in those areas and sand them down with the 400 grit sandpaper. There are also some grooves that got filled in while I was sanding. For these grooves, I use a nail to clean them out. I just need to be careful and make sure I don't scratch the print. Last step is a 600 grit wet sanding pass. I just dip the sandpaper in water and keep it wet while I sand. When you're done wet sanding, just wipe down any excess residue. Then your print should be ready for painting. I hope you enjoyed this video and it helps you on your next 3D print. If you want to see more videos like it, please like and subscribe and check this out next. Thank you for watching.